The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. But our topic today, will AI be the CEO of the future for your company? Harvard Business Review just came out with a study. That's the topic today. I'm Stephen Sakach, here again with Tullio Siragusa and Ash Maher. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Nothing like going live in the middle of a conversation, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's dive into it. So will AI replace CEOs? And, will employees prefer this outcome? Some of you are nodding yes right now. I know it. But I read somewhere a year ago, there was a company that said they're replacing their CEO with AI. And my initial reaction was, no, you didn't. You're just saying you did. And you're just asking ChatGPT some questions and pretending you did. And I know it, you know it. And I'm pretty sure that was the case. But it's not to say that this isn't and won't be a possibility in the future. I absolutely thought it was then. And even more so now that after this Harvard Business Review study. So I want to cover that study real quick. So they just came out with this report on a game they ran with 344 participants and ChatGPT version O. So where everyone was a CEO and they had to make decisions based on their virtual automotive company. And basically AI smoked every contestant by every metric just about, except there was one problem. And that was AI struggled with these black swan events, such as market collapses during COVID pandemic kind of stuff. They had programmed in unpredictable shocks to the system, like, supply chain issue, collapsing in pricing levels, things like that. They had student participants and executives participating in this. And the top performing students were the ones that adopted long-term strategies, and they avoided like rigid contracts and minimized their inventory risks and managed growth very cautiously and assured their flexibility. And so when these market shifts happen, they were in good position. The GPT-4o, on the other hand, had like this string of early successes, and it locked into this short-term optimization mindset, just relentlessly maximizing growth and profitability. And right now, CEOs are, cheering for this. And until the market shock hit, and then it sort of derailed. And interestingly, top executives also fell into the exact same track. They were doing kind of the same sort of stuff, but they were all fired faster than the long-term thinking students, based on a virtual board they had that would fire you if you failed in some way. So to me, all that is a very fixable problem. I mean, we're talking about the current AI technology. So like Sam Altman said, super intelligence will be here in a few thousand days, whatever that means. But, it could be 4 or 5 years. Right now, AI IQ is, Mo Gadet said, is about 150, 155. And he says that's like Elon Musk right now. Side note, though, there are a lot of kinds of lines of intelligence, and you can be strong in one and subpar in others. But what happens when AI gets to 250 IQ, 350, 500, 1,000? So for fun, we're going to let AI kind of make the case for the pros and cons to discuss the merits of it being CEO. So we've asked it, hey, give us the pros and cons. And then we're kind of going to discuss this. Tullio, what does AI first say is a pro about being the CEO?
Well, first of all, it reminds me of the conversation we had with some Patton a couple of weeks ago on the live broadcast on Thursday, because we were talking about creative works and how the way it's set up now, you still need the experience and your input, which isn't something the AI can just replicate. Like, you can't take a bunch of research and say, give me some insights on this, unless you have some expertise around that you can feed it into. But there's definitely some interesting things that it can do today that might outperform, in fact, will outperform most human beings, especially around data-driven decision making. We know a lot of energy is put into data decision data-driven decision making. So in fact, even like if you're looking for a CEO, a lot of the job description will say, or C-suite executive, the job description will say, we're looking for people who know how to make data-driven decisions, right? Now, one of the advantages of AI is that it excels at processing vast amounts of data very quickly. And it's really good at identifying patterns and making decisions based on hard evidence. So this could lead to highly efficient and very accurate business strategies, optimizing resources allocation, and even improve forecasting. So there's definitely tremendous value in that. And the benefit to that is that, an AI CEO could reduce human error and stop relying on sort of the gut feeling of making decisions and purely make rational, data-driven, perspective-based decisions.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. AI and data. We've been working with data and AI for years, even prior to this recent, change with how AI is being run. But so yeah, AI clearly, data decisions, that's a pro. So yeah, AI making a case, leading out with pro on data. Yes, you're very good at the data. Ash, what do you got?
Well, yeah, to piggyback on data, it's the analytical intelligence. AI has no, it's completely objective, right? I'm sorry, is that the right? Yeah, it's objective. Yeah, it's completely objective in leadership, meaning there's no bias, there's no personal agenda, no ego in its leadership quality. It's following predefined concepts that are set in the algorithm, right? So some of the benefits of this is that it allows for fairness and for transparency. Team members are aware that they're being managed by predefined rules that have no emotional attachment to that, meaning there's no ego or there's no personal bias or agenda. It's literally a machine following the best practices for performance. So that allows a culture of, or at least team members, to foster a culture of trust in the system that, hey, this CEO does have the best interest of the organization because that's its sole job, right? And there's performance metrics attached to it and so on. So it pulls away from any of that conversation of, I think that person or that leader or that CEO just doesn't like me, or or this CEO has an agenda that is outside of the big picture. Therefore, I don't know if I want to be a part of an organization that follows, that has a northern light that we don't agree with. Essentially, the northern light, the mission is programmed into the AI, and that gives confidence to a team. So those are a couple of the benefits of having an AI-based CEO.
Yeah. So these, and again, these are points. The AI is like, we kind of did the research with AI. It's like, hey, make your points here. I do think the flaw in this one might be just on the engineering, if it's got biases in the engineering of some type, right? Like it has.
But it's not worrying that the person making a good recommendation is jockeying for your position.
Yeah, no, it's not. So it doesn't have any of that stuff going on. This is an engineering problem, I think, that can be fixed ultimately. Basically, it's just, hey, yeah, is there some sort of biases in its programming to begin with, that where it thinks it's being objective, right? But actually isn't. But that can be fixed, I think. So so like Tullio said, it's not going to bring in a lot of baggage, and it's just going to be pretty straightforward, and what it thinks is straightforward.
And Steve, you have to imagine that if it's able to solve those problems, what would it bring into operations?
Yeah, I mean, there's I think we'll probably even get to some of that too. So let's go to the next point AI is making here.
So need sleep.
Exactly. 24/7 availability and scalability. This is the operational intelligence that Ash is talking about. It doesn't need sleep, doesn't need rest. It can continuously monitor stuff. It's on the clock. So you can have human shifts going, 3 human shifts a day or whatever. One AI boss going all the time. So it could do this, across multiple branches or units of a business simultaneously, which is kind of cool. I think this is a really good point in that it can kind of be everywhere all the time if needed. So that's a pretty strong point in its favor. I'm going to have to give it, definite thumbs up on that one for sure. Tullio, what do you got next?
Well, I was just going to add, just when you were worrying about whether you're putting in enough time, here comes this AI CEO competing with you.
Well, yeah, and then it's going to say, I got 3 shifts of humans. What if I replace them with robots in this role, this role, this role? That can go 24/7 like me.
Yeah,
There goes your $200 million a year salary, CEOs of Fortune 100. Sorry. And anyway, but the other thing we'll talk about, I'm sure some of the fallbacks of this, but the other thing you could do is rapid innovation and adaptation. This is something that is always a challenge for traditional leadership. When do you pivot? When do you make a change? When do you adapt with the market? What is the right time? What is the right adaptation? What is the right innovation to adapt based on what's going on in the market? And that's very complex, very difficult decision. So that creative and strategic intelligence is often something where some people don't hit the mark all the time, and some do. But the strengths of having AI, generative AI, making those decisions, that they're very, it has the algorithms that can prototype quickly new ideas, new products, new strategies, and can also integrate and triangulate the market trends and consumer behaviors all simultaneously at the same time to produce real-time relevant outputs, so you can make better innovative decisions. And the benefit of that is just the speed of innovation dramatically improves. The company that uses this stays ahead of competitors, stays ahead of markets in some cases, is able to predict trends, developing a breakthrough strategies that will often result into tremendous wealth for the business in doing that. So we know that there's some industry giants that are really good at this, that kind of hit the mark, but they're like a far few and in between. Imagine everyone being able to have that kind of capability. That's what the generative AI CEO sort of platform or environment could bring to the table. It's hard to compete with that.
Yeah, and I think like that Harvard study, it kind of showed pros and cons of that, in that it felt like it was cranking away, being pretty adaptive. But then when the big events happened, that's where the adaptation kind of fell apart. But that's also like something that could be trained, I think, too. It's like, hey, if you run cycles of different problems for it to figure out and ahead of time, right, that it will have solutions and modeling that it may have done. Or maybe you've got multiple AI CEOs giving you ideas for when you get into those situations, and then it comes up with, you vote on the best one or something. But
you hit something spot on there, Stephen. Having personally lived through, as the CEO of a startup, that a market change happened so rapidly and not being able to respond quickly enough, which had a drastic impact on the business, to the point where we had to pivot. The original model failed, but by the time we would pivot, it was very late in the game, right? So I essentially consider it was a failure because I couldn't react fast enough to the changes. And it's a real problem, and for most CEOs to make decisions on when to do that. So having something that could do it real time and quickly, that's a game changer, because you can't predict. So to be able to put all these models in place, like plan out, a market change, or plan out a new technology that no one thought of that's going to be disruptive to this industry, plan out whatever, all these different scenarios. I think you can actually model something that could be very, very powerful for businesses to reduce risk of failure, especially startup.
I think so too. I think like that's the problem with this Harvard study, is it just kind of threw in the middle there. Excuse me. But if you did model that quite a bit and just had these scenarios and throwing it in there, that it could kind of go through some just iterations again and again on different things, that it would actually be more ready than maybe a CEO would, because it's just thought through some of this stuff. And so I think even though the Harvard Business Study said that it couldn't adapt to these black swan events, I just think that was probably, they're using GPT-4o, but maybe with some training and things like that, or future AI, it will be, like you said, like it could be really, really good at this. So even though the Harvard Business Study says it's maybe not, and GPT right now says, oh no, I can be really good at that, I think I'd probably put it on the GPT side. Like, yeah, I think you'll be really good at that too.
Yeah.
Ash, what do we got next?
I want to add one more thing, especially when it has data or a winning reference. So, for example, if it had students that had a process that worked for it, now you integrate that system that worked into the GPT, and I can almost guarantee there'll probably be a different tune if they ran that test again against those same students. Right now, it could potentially even come up with different innovative approaches that maybe the students didn't think of. Once it has one winning approach, now it has different connections it can make with all of its ability to process. So that's just another thing I wanted to.
If everyone takes that gamification like game and just said, hey, we're all going to play this for a little bit and throw and come up with our own ideas, be the CEO, and then you take that data as the data set from the AI to run off of. I think there's just a lot of possibilities here.
No, 100%. So to segue now, the next thing is, consistent ethical enforcement. So, the ability for the ethical and moral intelligence of AI is next level. Some of the strengths that I could provide is it can be programmed to adhere strictly to a company's ethical guidelines, potentially creating consistent standard of ethical behavior across all levels. Some of the benefits of AI-driven ethical framework could eliminate inconsistencies and favoritism that gets brought up sometimes, or favoritism that occurs subconsciously. Maybe a leader's not aware that they sometimes demonstrate favoritism, and enforcement of corporate policies, enhancing corporate governance. So this goes back to what I mentioned earlier. It's as long as it understands what it needs to adhere to, it adheres to it at 100%. Now, I can imagine there'd be some challenges in this area, but again, data speaks, right? So whenever a black swan event could occur in this moral ethical guideline issue, it could optimize when it's programmed to fix those issues.
I think it's like, we know, like, what are the goals it's optimizing toward? If it's got a goal that's just like maximize profit, then who knows what its ethics could be with that.
Exactly.
But if you've got a right goal in there, it could be very consistent with its ethics. For some reason, when you were talking about this, I just flash on like Captain Kirk in one of these Star Trek episodes where it's like, forget about your computer intelligence stuff, and he goes off on some sideways creative solution, to the ethical or moral problem at hand, and comes through the other side, as the hero again.
Yeah,
you could never do that.
Yeah,
but.
And it's interesting too, because if you incorporate that cushion or flexibility based on certain scenarios, because there's certain gray areas, right? There's context, there's so much information one needs to, or an AI would need to determine what the right thing to do is. But imagine if like you said, Steve, if its goal was maximizing profits, and then you gave it some level of cushion of flexibility around that mission, then to your point, you're right. What kind of shortcuts would it come up with to achieve that goal? Now, if there are some moral guidelines where, you can't be 100% black and white, there has to be a level of flexibility. And let's say the mission is to create an environment that is inclusive, that everyone feels important and valued, and so on and so forth. It can then work out certain issues that, hey, this may go against our policy, but this is an example of that cushion flexibility based on these parameters because of this and that gets programmed into it. If it ultimately knows it's trying to find the best interest for all parties and make sure that that person feels valued, but also the organization is following its values and so on and so forth, it will do that, I believe, with a few kinks here and there, but that I imagine would have to be programmed over time. But yeah, to your point, if it has a different mission, a different thing it's programmed towards, I can imagine it'd be like the best at coming up with shortcuts that would cause short-term profits, long-term massive issues.
Yeah, let's think about that a little bit. So and I think, we're going to talk about purpose in a little bit, but I do think it applies here with the ethics, is that if AI is optimizing, like I said, to its sole purpose of maximizing, shareholder value, maximizing profits, I think we're doomed. if that's the scenario, we're definitely screwed. There is no value to a person being a cog in a machine to AI in some extent. If it's just like, hey, I'm focusing on just this one goal. There's no value for the environment, if it's just focusing on this one goal. So, but on the other hand too, if your goal is just about fixing the environment, and this is the sole goal, I think we're also doomed too, because then it's like this dystopian future that we're all worried about, is that we're running from robots because they've determined that we are the problem, and the best solution to the environment is to get rid of us. So if the goal is to reduce waste in landfills, well, the direct solution is to reduce the number of humans creating waste. So
I have 8 billion creatures that are producing the carbon footprint. Boom, there you go. Solved.
No problem solved. Now what?
Yeah, I'm literally just thinking in my head of a skit that would be hilarious. Imagine a scientist creating a robot for the sole purpose of saving the Earth. And then right when it pushes on, it gets all the knowledge and says, "Wait, you're the problem." Slap.
Well, but that talks to the I think one of the cons of this is, if machines were running things, it's one thing, right? So you can have incredible cognitive intelligence, analytical intelligence, but there are humans involved, right, to actually execute on some of these things. So if it was all just machine doing the execution, it'd be one thing, but that's not reality. So I don't think one of the cons is the lack of emotional intelligence, the empathy, the social intelligence to be able to understand various domains and nuances of human emotions, right? Like it could logically come up with a plan and say, okay, do this today. And that person might be having a bad day and they are not going to execute as well. And the machine just won't understand why that's the case. Now, it does a good job if you tell it to apply empathy in its messaging and its wording. It can do that, but it can't, through its own volition, figure out how to respond to a situation. So the risk with that is that you end up having potentially employees that may feel disconnected from leadership if the AI can't appropriately address human concerns or morale or workplace culture, which could lead into a lack of emotional connection and significantly lowered engagement. Not to mention, it might come up with a brilliant idea that can't be executed realistically because no one will buy into it. So there's the challenge of not having, through its own volition, the emotional intelligence, the empathy, and the intuition, the social intelligence needed to translate a great, brilliant idea into an executable form that can actually be digestible.
At the same time as when you're mentioning that, I'm thinking of so many CEOs out there that lack the emotional intelligence that is needed in a lot of these situations too. So I think AI, it's definitely a concern, but I think this is an area where ultimately it will prove out much better than humans and actually lead humans in a way with its gravity on this, because
maybe those CEOs are drones.
If a con is lack of emotional intelligence, I think people are saying, well, that's a freaking con at my company right now. So it's definitely it needs to improve in this, but I think like I said, once it gets up to those higher IQs and different IQs,
but to your point, on its own volition, it will not come up with that, but it can be told, design this being empathetic to the needs of the environment, and it can be fed into what the environment and circumstances are, and it'll come up with a better, more empathetic approach to it than most human beings. So that's definitely, that con can actually be massaged, but its own volition, it won't. You still need a human input that says, now I want you to create a realistic way to do this by infusing some empathy and a little bit of love and a little bit of patience. Here's the circumstances. And it will react to that, but not on its own. It lacks that ability to do it on its own.
I think if you have engineering that comes in with a more well-rounded, fuller consciousness and saying, hey, this is the approach you want to take, how can we get the AI to do that? I think it'll get there. And I think we're playing with that. We're on the, we're on the verge of having that right now with some of the stuff we're doing. So Ash, what's the next con that AI has decided why it can't be a CEO that well?
Yeah, to piggyback on the previous, its lack of empathy leads it to difficulty with ambiguity and complex situations. So one of its weaknesses is that AI may struggle to handle ambiguous situations that require a deep understanding of context, human relationships, and intuition. Elements that often arise in situations that we deal with on a day-to-day as leaders, right? There's certain scenarios where you're like, man, that's the first time I'm dealing with that. And you have to sit there and reflect and think about how I'm going to deal with this very unique, specific outlier of a scenario that involves an extreme level of empathy and understanding. The AI has a hard time doing that. If it's already locked in on, hey, this is our process and so on and so forth, it may completely bypass an ambiguous situation, a situation that's new, that has just risen. I think that's ultimately what it is. When new things arise, things that it has never dealt with before, it will probably totally dumpster fire the situation. If anything, probably cause more issues with its lack of empathy and understanding. And I think the big risk here is that complex, ambiguous problems that don't have clear data-driven solutions, references, things to look back on, precedents, if anything, solutions could be mismanaged by AI. And as it may lack the flexibility and the human intuition that humans offer. So that lack of empathy, the ability to not have any data or reference, when things show up that there is no data, just imagine it's going to be a messy situation. But again, solutions to those scenarios, that when things like that happen, AI can be programmed to understand. Steve, to your point, if the AI gets to a point where it's using at 1,000 level IQ, then the question becomes, is the AI sentient, right? And can a sentient AI then have the understanding of ambiguousness and cushion and flexibility and so on? But right now it's not there, right? So it wouldn't have the ability to decipher. And it would pretty much dumpster fire, and then people would have to jump in, get involved, and fix that really random scenario that occurred. Similarly to how businesses have had to evolve, right? When really, really bad things happen and then it goes out to the news and everyone knows it's happening, that's when they adjust the business. I think it's the same with AI. It's going to be adhering to its previous programming. And then when things happen that are complete outliers and it completely wrecks the situation, that's when human has to come and get involved and fix those problems.
I think the key thing to all this, just to piggyback what you're saying, Ash, it does not have the experience of failure and the lessons that come from failure.
Yeah.
It will never have that experience because it's set up to succeed and to be perfect and to hallucinate. Even if it doesn't have an answer, it'll hallucinate an answer, right? So it doesn't have to been there, done that, went through the pain of that, learned from this experience, that lesson. It doesn't have that ability to do that. And that's also a tremendous lack of creativity, because a lot of our creativity comes from those life experiences, right? And it doesn't have like a creative genius like Stephen, right? So I wouldn't want to replace that either, because you just don't have, just some things they come from someone's inner soul, from their experiences of life. And that machine will never have that experience ever, no matter how much they can program. It can be pre-programmed to respond and to simulate a similar thing, but it has to come from someone who's actually lived it, that can give it the prompts to respond that way, right? So what else do you think, Steve, around the creativity stuff?
Yeah, I'll get to creativity in a second. I just when you guys are talking about this, I'm just thinking too about the complexity of like corporate politics sometimes, where I could see AI being thrown under the bus, set up to fail, so that someone could move in, kind of a power play, and that AI might not recognize the complexity of politics within a situation, or someone making a power move of some type to replace it or usurp it. And so then here becomes the problem. Well, how can we prevent that from happening? Well, we need AI to be, very knowledgeable on politics and stuff. So then it starts recognizing and starts defending against some of these perceived threats. And now we're off, with a, it's like how, I guess.
Must eliminate.
Like, what are you doing, Dave? So yeah, there's a lot there with the complexity that I think we can get into. But yeah, back to the cons. This is one for sure, I think that just a lot of people pick up on, and this is one that AI said would be a con for it, is its creative limitations. So divergent thinking. AI can be creative in a lot of specific ways, and we use it for brainstorming a lot of times. It's very good at that. It may lack true capacity for divergent thinking that drives breakthrough innovations. Its creativity is typically bounded by the data it's been trained on. So that's kind of a key point there, is that it's just using what's out there, not what could be out there or what could come from that a lot of times, the novelty, the creative novelty that could happen. So that's one of its criticisms, but that's really where I think we're talking about, going back to Sam Altman's quote, where like we're maybe a few thousand days away from something that's truly like that, I think. So the risk here on this is that it may not be developing some of those groundbreaking ideas that come from human intuition, the abstract thinking, the spontaneous flashes of inspiration that have driven many successful companies forward. And I think that's absolutely true. There are these peak states of consciousness that can strike people, especially creative people, where it's just suddenly you're like way up here in your consciousness with an idea, and you might not be able to stay there, but you just had it for like, a minute or 30 seconds or 5 minutes, and you're like, oh, wow, that would be an amazing idea. Who knows where that comes from? That's one of the big questions, and we're talking about what is being human or whatever, but where does that creative bit of intelligence come from, that peak state that suddenly was in there, that came from nowhere, that's something that didn't exist before that now will exist. So AI definitely, with it's being modeled on all of our information, and that may be its boundaries, its limitations sometimes on the creativity. So I think that's a definite con.
Yeah, absolutely. The perfect example, like you go into an office and you haven't spoken to someone about a particular topic at all, and you get a download of an idea and you start sharing that idea, and the person's like, oh my gosh, I've been thinking about that for the past month and a half. So there's this sort of collective intelligence that you sort of pick up on, this vibe they can pick up on when you're tuned in to people around you. AI is never going to be able to do that. That sort of intuitive ability to connect on an idea or just through volition come up with an idea. So that it's not going to have that. That's not something you can program. That's part of our human nature, right? And also it will lack the ability to make unforeseen, like to be able to predict unforeseen scenarios or react to unforeseen scenarios. So it doesn't have the adaptive intelligence that is inherent in being human. Even animals don't have that, right? So then that's because it relies heavily on algorithms and data sets and training. But in unprecedented situations like pandemics or global crisis or freaking tornado, okay, it may fail to adapt quickly to these data sets that are outside of its programmed experiences. And so that represents a risk, because it will create a suboptimal decision ability in very volatile, uncertain, and unprecedented situations and circumstances, and not be able to think outside the box and anticipate social or cultural implications. So that's an inherently human thing, right? You can program it all you want, but it's never through its own volition going to come up with some creative idea about, I have a thought on how we could solve this. So I think we could do something really cool with this. And the collective intelligence that comes from people speaking and talking to each other and sort of vibing on the topic like that, it never will have that ability. No matter how many programming options or create scenarios will create, it will never through its own volition come up with. And if it does, that's going to be a scary world, but I don't think it ever will.
And Tullio, to your point, having that human connection is so important. In times of peril, sometimes there isn't a solution. Sometimes you just need a leader that's able to motivate, inspire through vision, and communicate, right, in a way that brings peace and hope to the team. And unfortunately, it's motivation, social intelligence. AI can't do that. A lot of times when you're talking about that northern light and that mission, that mission a company organization has, it's up to the leader to communicate that during challenging times, that, hey, we are still standing by our mission to do X, Y, and Z that is bigger than ourselves. To communicate and articulate that is a very human element that is still being missed with AI intelligence. And a risk without a leader who can inspire or cultivate a sense of belonging and purpose, the company could see lower employee morale and higher turnover. So if I don't feel that I'm emotionally connected to my leader, or the leader's not able to inspire or motivate, yeah, of course I'm going to jump ship when things are going crazy and everyone's anxious and there's challenges arising. I don't want to hear a robot give me robot responses when the world is not going well for us right now, when business is challenged, when we're struggling through certain situations that we have to overcome as a unit. If anything, I would just say, shut up, robot. Someone in my team communicate with us. We're all in this together. You're human still, right? I've been wanting to talk to each person and wanting to have that conversation. I know for me as someone within an organization, I would want that. right? I'd want to be able to talk to my team members and connect. And I want to connect with a leader that is able to guide us and inspire us. So I think that's another big issue, is that it doesn't have these social intelligence to be able to do that.
Yeah, I when you're talking about this, I kind of picture like things just going awful at some point, and who's going to stand up on that chair and speak to the team, about whatever the crisis is.
Yeah.
AI, yeah, it won't be that. But then I'm thinking about, well, if we're talking about like a future organization, you'll have more of these self-managed teams where AI wants you to be that person. You want someone in there and they'll be empowered to be that person for, hey, this is where I can really lead the team. I can really lead the company. And it's my responsibility and your responsibility. And a couple of us, let's fill that void right now. And so I think I can see a solution being there to this problem where AI is really just like the space holder for you to rise to the occasion at times. Whoever's the most actualized person for this particular moment, whoever's got the most skills that can do that. I could definitely see a scenario where you could work around that.
Yes.
In some way.
I don't know why my thought, I'm just thinking a situation like that, right? Imagine the AI does have that ability and everything, is bad, right? There's a board meeting going on. Everyone's stressed out. And imagine a C-3PO looking robot comes in, sits down, sits at the head of the table, and everyone's looking to that robot for the answer. And the robot says, "You guys got this. I believe in you." And then walks out. Can you imagine? You would hope that would be empowering. That's his version of empowering.
I will give it some credit that if you work with it long enough and it starts to learn what you care about and what you're interested in, and you've given it enough things to solve or enough content to generate based on all your inputs, it can be a little adaptable, not tremendously adaptable. And I kind of tested this. I went on ChatGPT and I said, "What are you feeling?" It's like, "I'm feeling focused and ready to assist you." I was trying to see if it had some kind of, I said, "Any new ideas you want to share?" Okay, let's see if it comes up with new ideas. And he goes, "I've been thinking about the concept of empathetic innovation lately." And it's talking about a lot of the inputs I've been giving it to it about, creating products and services that are aligned with people's needs. It's got a lot of the design thinking things that I've worked with. And then I mentioned something about AI CMO. He goes, "Imagine pairing AI tools like those you're working on and AI CMO and real human insights to create hyper-personalized yet deeply human customer experiences." And I was like, and then went on and on. I'm like, so I was like, "So you mean human intuition is what you're referring to?" And it was like, "Yes, exactly. Human intuition is a key element of empathetic innovation." So at least it recognizes that it can't on its own produce all the results that are necessary. Human intuition is still needed. But, I was like, that's pretty impressive. But it can't on its own volition, without any input, come up with an idea of something new. It just can't do it.
Yeah, right now, like we said. So it'll be interesting. I mean, it's very, like Ash said too, it's very interesting kind of situation where we're, how much of a robot is this that we'd be dealing with? How much can it inspire us? And yeah, to your point too, Leo.
That talks to one of the other cons, which is the lack of vision or ability to connect vision with long-term purpose, which is really about purpose-driven leadership, right? So it can't figure out while it excels about optimizing specific predefined goals and input you've given it, it does not really translate that into how you can create purpose and direction in a company beyond the metrics, right? So the risk of that is that without a lack of broader human vision, such as empathy or purpose driven beyond profits, it could lead a company that misuses emotional and spiritual components for long-term sustainability impact. It can actually utilize human way of working in a way that's not driving towards the right purpose and goal. So it could essentially become counterproductive to what it's supposed to do, which is create a sense of feeling and belonging and purpose. So it doesn't have that ability today on its own. But as you said, it could be programmed. It could spend enough time with you, like ChatGPT has spent enough time, years now, learning how you think and operate that it starts to kind of see what you care about. Because it could have come up with a number of other things, but it came up with that specific topic because this happens to be the primary thing I care about. So it could be adaptable to a certain degree as it learns more about you. So maybe somehow eventually there'll be a more human to machine interaction ongoing. Maybe it listens more. I don't know. There's probably a way to solve this problem. Do we want it solved? That's another question. Not sure.
Yeah. So I'm, on that purpose, this is going back to the discussion that we were talking about earlier, is if AI is just optimizing to like one stakeholder, it's just going to forget about all the others. So I really think that's where this conscious capitalism comes in, where it's got to, whatever its purpose is, it should really consider all stakeholders in there. So, if it's going to consider the profits, it's got to consider the investors and all that, but also what about your customers? What about your employees? What about your vendors, partners, your community, your environment? If we can get purpose-driven AI like that in companies, then we've got a chance. If it's solely profit chasing, something like that, and that's just going to, we're just doomed, is what I said earlier. It's going to be so good at definitely pursuing that one thing at all costs that we're going to be in trouble. So we really, when it gets down to it, I think we desperately need companies to alter their purpose. So at the very least, they move to kind of a higher place with when they're starting to use AI in there and a much higher loving purpose. And that's probably really where the sweet spot of using AI right now would be, is if we can get that higher gravity in the mix there, build love into scalable systems. Absolutely.
Program that into the AI. Program that.
Program that into, the AI into your business. And I think when you're using AI, then you're not going to be going sideways. You're not going to have it run you into a scandal like some of the executives we talked about in the past that have that single-minded purpose. So, and we're talking about right now, 150 IQ or something. When that doubles, triples, gets to 1,000, it's going to be formidable, and it's going to be integrated in every business that can integrate it, which is probably most businesses at some way or another. So that's it for today's show. Thanks for tuning in. We've been diving into the future of work recently with some guests and wanted to hit on some fun topics here. As a reminder, we have these shows with Ash and Tullio, myself on Tuesdays. We've got our 10-minute shows on Wednesday, currently running our Empathy Expansion Kit series. And we are live on Thursdays with our guests. Please join in the conversation, like and subscribe, tell your friends and all that, and we'll see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.